Can you hear me?
I can do. Wonderful. We've got you on the stream. You're live and direct. Uh, how's Riverside?
Amazing.
Did we work out the technical difficulties?
Yeah, I think I had to open a cashless browser and it's working now. So everything looks great.
We love it. We'll probably be moving to a different platform soon so we can avoid these technical hitches. Linda, I've been looking forward to this conversation. Ethical AI has been in my feed ever since we chatted last. But give me some context on you. You're hyper ambitious, like doing an incredible amount at such a young age. Let's get into it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you too, Viraj, honestly.
We're trying.
Yeah. Well, I'll try. Yeah, so I started in ethical AI back when I was at Columbia. It was actually sort of by accident. I originally wanted to be a China studies professor for the longest time.
China
And
studies professor.
I,
And now in ethical
yeah, so
AI.
Yeah, now I'm in ethical AI. So honestly, I think when people say you can do anything, you say like you can do anything, you can end up anywhere. It's really true. Because when I was younger, was I was a piano prodigy, and so I like played piano from the age of 6. I mastered all the box inventions by age 7. It was covered by local media when I was like 6 years old as well for my recitals. So like for the longest time, I think, it was presumed that I would become like this just like huge musical talent. And somehow I just ended up in academia instead. I wanted to be a China studies professor for a really long time. I like love China, classical Chinese culture. But what actually happened was at my time during my time at Columbia, I first authored a paper with my supervisor on gender bias in government and media attention to protest events in China, and we used big data from Weibo, which is the most popular microblogging platform in China. And I realized that actually, if you want to analyze unstructured text data in Mandarin Chinese, they don't have spaces between the different words. And so you
Hmm.
have to actually manually insert spaces between the words to make it more like English so that it's actually analyzable for natural language processing algorithms and sentiment analysis, for instance. This was many, many years back, though. I feel very old talking about this because this is before like AI was a really big deal. It was just sort of like this like very niche field that people were like, oh, artificial intelligence, cool. And then ChatGPT, I think, had just come out, and it was like really glitchy. Like people, I mean, I think it went viral, but it was just like this random, like
But it was
side
very
thing.
like Devi community focused, like dev tech.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so like I was sort of like one of the only people in like a lot of my circles of friends like using ChatGPT and like talking about AI, and people like had no idea. I mean, I think it still feels that way, but I think that
I
more
completely
and more
agree.
people are. Right, yeah. And it basically was in the process of doing that paper that I realized this is sort of problematic. There are biases that are sort of entrenched or baked into like these algorithms from the start. And I that led me to becoming the youngest invited author for an Oxford Handbook chapter on decolonizing computational methods, ethical AI applications, and looking specifically at non-European languages. And so that's really where the journey started, and it was really unexpected. I think I just cared about this issue a lot, and I also was really interested in tech, and it just sort of sprouted from there. And then now at Oxford, I look at ethical AI. I look at digital inclusion, specifically for women and women of different ages, people of different ages. Uh, Women are 19% less likely to be able to access internet than men throughout the world. So we use a big data that's funded by the Gates Foundation, covering 193 countries, and looking at the relationships between online and offline gender inequalities. And so that's really the journey into ethical AI.
That is absolutely insane. I have quite literally so many questions. At its core, can you give me a definition of what you describe as ethical AI?
Well, I think first of all, the Karen, I don't know if you've read this book, The Empire of AI by Karen Hall,
I have
but
not.
I think
We'll add it to the
oh, so
reading
okay,
list of
so
the show.
hugely recommend. So I mean, Karen Hall, she's worked in Silicon Valley for a long time. She's worked with Sam Altman, OpenAI, and so she talks about how AI has become this like huge umbrella term that covers almost anything. If you actually, so there are lots of different, there are lots of disagreements on how to even define AI, because AI is almost like the way we use transportation. It can mean cars, it can mean walking, it can mean bikes or plane travel, etc. Uh, so I guess for me personally, ethical AI is applications of AI that sort of try to contravene a lot of its biases, and specifically looking at computer systems and its applications. So that's still quite broad, but like so I can give some maybe more concrete examples. So for instance, like there's lots of algorithmic bias, right? So like one aspect of ethical AI application would be trying to contravene biases in algorithms in detecting diseases for certain people of different races, right?
What inside of these models there would be bias against certain backgrounds and ethnicities.
Yes, yes, because
Wow.
AI models, they're trained on data. So like existing historical data has probably maybe always been biased towards white people or biased towards cisgender men. And so when you train algorithms on this test data, because algorithms aren't magical, they're trained on data sets. So when this data set itself is already biased or the historical data is already skewed towards a certain demographic, then the outcomes that it gives you, like the predictions that it gives you based on like likelihoods of the disease or pattern matching, will also skew towards that bias. So it's really just generational.
Okay, so when we're building these models out and we're doing the training, that independent training, yeah, the different types of training that we do throughout that process, is this as simple as just making sure that we're considering the right ethical parameters, or not, or is it not as simple as that?
I think this, because I spoke a lot of this. I think so. There are multiple angles to this. Like one of them that is very important, but other aspects also include like the way the algorithm itself is actually built, and then the way the data is collected, and then how you're actually feeding the data into the models. And then this also can, on the more technical end, this touches on like from cybersecurity to statistical, asymptomatic sort of tests to make sure that a model that you're using is actually unbiased, right? Because AI just touches on so many aspects, from supervised to unsupervised machine learning, which would cover certain kinds of regressions, like k-fold tests, etc. I don't really want to get too much into the weeds of that because it gets a little bit too technical, but it covers everything, right? And I think one big aspect is like how we're collecting data, and then how we're creating and constructing algorithms, because algorithms are the basis of like all of the most like fancy or all of the most sort of cutting edge processes and systems that we're seeing today. Everything from like agents. Agents still need data to be able to operate, right? So everyone's sort of going crazy about AGI, but like what is AGI fed on, and what are these LLMs, generative AI? What is it fed on? It's fed on like lots and lots and lots of data. And so that touches on one aspect. And then obviously Karen Hall has also, touched on this in Empire Beta, and something that a lot of, AI ethicists and I've also, looked upon is the environmental impact of if we're just talking about Gen AI, for instance, right? Like the data centers are being cooled by like drinking water of citizens in the United States, for instance, and there's very little regulatory or if any boundaries on like where the boundary is between like actually this is our environment, we should have this space, and we should have clean drinking water for citizens first before data centers, right? So that's I think there's a lot more media coverage on that now, fortunately. And then so there are lots of different moving parts, everything from like bias in applications, for instance in employment. A lot of VCs are now using AI to automate their processes, and then this touches on pattern matching, and pattern matching by investors without algorithms is already biased. And so let alone if you're using historical data on like what companies have been funded and have turned into unicorns, well, that excludes a lot of people of color and a lot of women, right? And everything from that to the way that the AI systems are actually interacting with physical ecosystems, like your physical environment, because these data centers have to be cooled down somehow. And with the way that OpenAI has really pushed through scale or perish, the scale or nothing at all, because and Empire also touches on this as well, and I find that book really really elucidating. But a lot of these algorithms, they're using tons of data, and that uses a lot of GPU. So it overheats very easily, and then you need clean drinking water to actually go and cool it down. And all of these aspects would combined be what I would say is like the larger arena of ethical AI.
Where do you even begin? Like if it covers all parts of the spectrum and it's like all across the vertical, across the horizontal, how does one even begin to start not providing or creating a pill for it, but educating people on like, great, look, this is happening and it needs to be implemented in future renditions of models?
Well, I think this is where it's really nice that like it takes a village. And so like I know that I'm quite, I a lot of people told me like they've sort of like interacted with ethical AI first through me, but I don't really take credit for any of that because I think that like there's so many amazing academics and technologists and people like startup founders, and investors as well, who have been working in ethical AI for a long time, right? And I think every time people hear the word ethics, like they get sort of like spooked by it because they're like, oh, this means like more regulation, this means less profit. That's not really true. I mean, for instance, with my startup Infrajoy Labs, we support enterprises in unlocking new consumer segments. And I would say that what we're doing is also in the ethical AI umbrella because we're ensuring that AI algorithms are actually serving, first of all, developers, and second of all, in making sure that they're actually including long marginalized consumers, right? So I think there's sort of different aspects that you can work in, but the main answer that I have is that where do you begin is we sort of begin in the areas that we have the interest and also the specialization and the resources that we can really make a difference in. Sort of you start with one area. You don't really have to do all of it as one person, right? Because ultimately this is a community effort. It's an industry wide sort of movement.
Why does this mean so much to you?
Well, I think I just care a lot about justice. And I also I think beyond just sort of like the beyond just sort of like the systemic justice aspect, which I think everyone should care about, and everyone I know does care about that, right? Just sort of being in this world, like you want to see that systems are being built in a really good way, right? And also usually when it's ethical, it's also efficient. I was just talking to a friend today about this, and he was saying that he's an investor and he does not do any warm intros. He just does all of his research onto different companies is outbound. And he's found that actually, without even trying to be diverse, like a lot of the founders that he started to fund are actually diverse. Like they're like Black
Really?
founders, yeah, they're like Indian founders, and like these are founders that usually would not be taken on by traditional VCs because VCs always pattern match, right? And VCs usually tend to take warm intros, and this actually hurts the business just as much as it hurts founders, because like objectively speaking, like the best founders aren't going to be like fitting any kind of pattern. They're just
They're the
the end of the
anomalies. They are the ones that don't fit the pattern.
yeah, exactly, right. And so I think I take that and I really appreciate that approach because I take the same approach with, if we're looking at ethical AI, it's not really like this cosmetic sort of add-on. It's not charity. It's really just looking at like, hey, like if this technology is failing a group of people, it's also not going to be good for the market. It's also not going to be good for business. It's not going to be good for profit either. Like for instance, older consumers, they are the fastest growing demographic segment in the world, and this is $1 trillion market. And because of ageism, these businesses are missing out on billions of dollars of revenue per year. And this is just in the UK alone. That's not just an ethical failure, that's a systemic and market failure, right? And so I think a lot of times it's also just being objective about efficiency and finding these like problems in society that I think for me personally as like a PhD and a nerd, I find it intellectually stimulating, but also as someone who is quite obsessed with efficiency, I find it inefficient that businesses have operated in this way, and I want to solve that issue.
I want to touch on Infrajoy for a short period of time. I know we've only got you for a little bit before you get back to the research. Talk to me about why you decided that elderly tech was the place to decide to build something.
I mean, this there's a lot of layers to this. So I can start with the academic layer. So the academic layer is that I was looking at sort of digital inclusion in my research, and there's so much overlap between gender and age, right? And it's like in conversations with like my friends and stuff like that, you hear a lot about their grandmother or like their parents struggling with their phones, right? And so this is like a problem that has existed, and it's been painful, and a lot of people have tried to address it in different ways but failed because it's not scalable or because it's not really systematic enough. And really, if you look at the intersection between gender and age, cisgender women will tend to live longer or have longer lifespans than men. So actually, what ends up happening is there's a double marginalization. When women are younger, especially in poor areas, they already have trouble accessing internet. And then when they do access, or if they ever do, then there's also an added barrier of usability and accessibility on these platforms, right? And so from the academic perspective, I think that was an issue that I found really intellectually stimulating and also really interesting and really important because lots of people are being left out from something that should be accessible for everyone. Everyone talks about the internet as like democratizing information flows, democratizing access to resources, and yet this huge segment of the population that also has, by the way, a ton of wealth is just being shoved out of the market, and that's just not right. And then on a personal aspect, my grandma, she actually had kidney surgery during the COVID pandemic in Beijing, and that was during the lockdown. And so she like nearly didn't survive the recovery because she couldn't order groceries online, and there was not really anyone there to support her, and the lockdown was very strict. So we had to beg family connections to go and support her, and that also just left a really deep impression on me because you start to realize actually digital technology is so integral to our everyday lives. It is so important. And yet there's just been no kind of infrastructure to make it accessible, to make it usable. Even as we're talking about longevity, as we're talking about longer lifespans and better quality of life, we're not actually building foundations for that quality of life for, our, older relatives, or, or for ourselves as we get older. Of course, technology will keep innovating, but the issue comes that, the way that it's innovating is not really keeping in mind a future proofing sort of mechanism. And
What does a future proof version of that look like? I mean, in short, like what does inclusive AI infrastructure look like at scale?
I was at scale, it looks like the design, from everything from the design process to the development process, takes into account the cognitive and the visual needs of older consumers at the very least. So for instance, like something as simple as text size, like 70% of user drop-offs from websites are due to small text size alone. And this is something that's easily fixable. Everything from that to cognitive overload when you go on a website and there's just like way too much information. Or when you're trying to buy a product or a service and it's just like so confusing that you don't even want to buy it anymore. Right. And I think one concept in accessibility also is that when we make something accessible for one demographic, it actually makes it more accessible to everyone else. Someone who's like nearsighted, I find a lot of financial products or health products like hard to really navigate. And and I'm just like in my 20s. Like think about my grandma or someone who like actually has visual impairment. I mean, so these are sort of examples of what it looks like in the context of a digital sphere. But if we're talking like in robotics or in hardware, there are lots of really amazing companies also working in this area too. There I think there are companies that actually could track when an older person would fall or have a heart attack by Wi-Fi monitors, which is really cool as well. So I think there's lots of aspects of how accessibility really feeds into our daily lives and on the digital end, which is what I work in. This AI infrastructure looks like supporting dev tech teams and also the end users to make sure that these products, these platforms are being usable, they are accessible, and it's based on real live sort of workshopping and research that we've done.
Is the goal then to sort of build a standard that can be
Yes.
implemented across anyone building any product, digital product, so to speak?
Absolutely. Yeah, you touched on exactly our ambition. The goal is to build the first ever global golden standard for elderly usability, or just for AI accessibility as a whole, right? Or accessibility using
And
AI.
when we say global standard, like that's not something that like Google has to put into place. Are we talking about it from a governmental point of view, or are we talking about it from a like an existing monopoly point of view?
Well, I would say that no monopoly of this exists yet. And so I think just from the policy perspective, if that's what it takes to not only ensure that these standards are enshrined, but also, to make this to really solidify this market gap, then yes, absolutely. But I think just from the lens of efficiency, the most efficient way to ensure that enterprises actually care about making their platforms usable is going to be in collaboration with government organizations and also in collaboration with interested and invested enterprises, because you have to remember lots of health firms, lots of financial firms are deeply invested into this area because they have older patients and consumers. And for health firms in particular, usability is not just a matter of customer satisfaction or retention, it's a matter of life or death. If your older patients aren't able to book an appointment when they need to, and they die because of sickness, because of that, quite literally, well, that isn't it, and it might not be a legal liability under the letter of the law, but that is a burden that you carry as a health company that you've set out to, lower the risk of an illness, and yet you failed.
In the companies that you've talked to, do you think that weighs on their conscience?
I would say yes. I mean, not, and I think also you have to look at companies as headed by people,
Hmm.
and I think a lot of sort of mainstream media reports about health companies tend to maybe skew a bit negative sometimes, but really, like a lot of the founders I've talked to of these health firms, they started it because they wanted to help people, because they believed in the medicine they were developing, because they believed in the process they were developing in conjunction with NHS and whatnot. And to see that the process that they developed have these massive gaps, they are extremely, I wouldn't even say enthusiastic, they're so deeply invested in making sure that this is corrected for. And that's really where a lot of the, I think, motivation and the drive for Infrajoy also comes from, because I, like I said before, I see it as a community effort. It really is that we're working with companies together. We're not, we're like, we're not like a like we're not like a what is it called, one of those like gladiators going this like, no, you have to do like it really just comes from like, collaboration and working with people to find out like their pain points, and realizing, oh, this is actually a massive gap, and your tech teams don't know where to start with this. Well, we have the expertise, we can help you with this, and like we can do this together. We can make these platforms, we can make these products better for your users, your consumers, your patients together. It's collaborative for sure.
Do you think Europe's the right place to start this movement?
Oh, absolutely. I
Why?
think Europe
We
is
get
an
bogged down in
amazing.
regulation a lot of the time. We don't innovate as much. Why would the entire ecosystem want to adopt something like this?
Well, I think Europe also leads a lot of the world in AI ethics and in caring about the impact of AI. And I think also, not to sound like a politician, but obviously every every country has sort of its pros and cons of working there, right? You have and I've lived in the U.S., I've lived in China, and I now live
You got
here.
the best of it all. You could sort of look at it and go, right, I can take the best from there, the best from here, what works there, what doesn't work there.
I try. But I would say that the European ecosystem is very dedicated to looking at the future consequences of these technologies. And sometimes I think that comes with pros and cons, so they can be a little bit too cautious with innovation. But then you also have these amazing unicorns like Lovable, like so many other companies that have come out of the UK, out of Europe, and you just can't deny that the founders here are brilliant, and also a lot of the policymakers here, a lot of the enterprises that we've spoken to, they are so deeply passionate about this issue, about making sure that we're making technology, we're making AI something that is usable for every demographic, that is actually protecting consumers and working really well with a free market, right? And so I think that this is a really ripe ecosystem, and it's a really interesting one as well, because it's very different from America, where America is very much so, go, 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 which I think there's a lot of benefit to that as well. But in certain contexts, you can really see the differences in how people approach issues in Europe. It's very thoughtful, right? And it's very measured, and it can be very calculated. And I think that's actually really great breeding ground for um, Infrajoy beyond just a product, but also a movement. And that's what I found really refreshing. And also being part of the Eurotech Federation, which my friends lead, working together with different stakeholders in the European innovation ecosystem, including European Central Bank, etc. You can really see that there is so much passion for this, in a way that you only get to develop when you're able to take things one step at a time, rather than wanting to like take 20 million steps in, what, half a step, the way that I think a lot of the US tends to be, which can be good in certain contexts, but can be also harmful in others.
I like your description of the European, like kind of measured step. I think Lovable is a great example of that. And like one of the darlings of Europe is amongst many that we're currently getting. But one of the kind of nuances that I've noticed in their hiring is like they've got this like insane talent team, and they're like really, really curating an amazing team together
Yeah.
across
Yeah.
different areas. It's not just like pure play devs, but it feels like a renaissance team from completely different areas. Sort of like when we think about OpenAI and the way that it's described as this ethereal place to work of like, I've got a writer, I've got someone that studied literature and history. Europe has that culture that I don't think we tap into enough. And we don't think, I truly believe is valuable in the long term.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think what Lovable has done is amazing, because they really just set out to make something that people love, right? And they're
It's
like
in the name.
XYZ. Yeah, and they did that, right? And so I think that kind of mindset is obviously, it comes a lot from YC, and I think YC is a really amazing, breeding ground for that. But I think that also has merged a lot of the culture in Europe, where it's like, you really treat it as an artistry, like you said, you're curating this team, you're also curating a product, you're curating, um, an entire brand, right? That makes something truly long lasting and legacy building. And I truly do believe that Europe is a really great ecosystem for that.
Linda, this has been an absolute pleasure. We've got to get you back on the show to do some deep dives because there are so
Oh,
many different facets that we haven't covered about you and your life and your work more specifically. I'm, I've got to jump to the next guest. This has been an absolute pleasure. We're going to do this
me
again. I'll put
too.
some time in the calendar.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure's all mine. Speak soon. Ciao.
Yes, bye.